I have
Oh, you have them. Thank you. You're a sweetheart.
If you'll all take your seats, we'll start in a minute. I'd like to welcome you all to the Ararat Eskejian Museum. My name is Martin Eskejian. I'm the chairman, but Maggie does all the work. And we're glad you're all here, and we welcome you to listen to this very exciting lecture and discussion today. If you have your cell phone, please turn it on vibrate at this time. And remember, we're live streaming, so having a cell phone go off in the middle of this wouldn't be real great. Okay, today's program invites the general public to watch key scenes from The Promise, extended with audiovisual testimony of survivors and witnesses to the Armenian Genocide. Throughout an interactive guided viewing, Dr. Carla Garbedian and Seta Entelkian will describe what's going on so you can learn some of the important details about the production of the film and how the testimony extends the historical understanding of the Armenian Genocide beyond just this film. The two speakers are Dr. Carla Garbedian, filmmaker based in London. She also has a PhD from the London School of Economics. Many know her as the director of Screamers, a documentary produced with the BBC featuring System of the Down that was shown in theaters in the US in 2007, and which is now being translated into 14 languages. Carla was the associate producer of The Promise, working with all the heads of production for the film. She's a member of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, British Academy of Film and Television Arts, and directors of the UK. Additionally, Carla was responsible for the digitizing of the Armenian Film Foundation's collection of genocide testimonies that is part of the USC Shoah Foundation's Visual History Archive of 55,000 testimonies of genocide survivors in the 20th century, which is expanding now to include the voices from today's violent atrocities. Seta Entelkian is the content and outreach specialist of the Armenian Genocide Education at USC Shoah Foundation. She has a bachelor's in arts and history from LMU, Loyola Marymount, and a master's in teaching from the University of California, Irvine. Since she's been hired as the Education Department's team in 2017, her main role has been to expand the Armenian Genocide testimony-based educational resources on USC Shoah Foundation's educational website. Eyewitness, to support teachers and students to effectively teach and learn about the Armenian Genocide through the voices of Armenian survivors, witnesses, scholars, and descendants. She has been instrumental in developing the teaching film with testimony of The Promise, educational resources and teaching training workshops to support educators to teach the film with testimony to extend their historical understanding beyond this film. And just so you know, that we're in the Ararat Eskejian Museum, and my father, Luther Eskejian, was a genocide survivor. So to start, Seta, would you go ahead and begin the meeting? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eskejian. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's special program, The Promise Contextualized with Testimony, hosted by the Ararat Eskejian Museum, very generously. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, the Eskejians. Thank you for joining us all today for this special and unique program, which is the first of many to be presented this year throughout the country. Today's program is unique in that we would like to invite you to join a conversation between myself and Dr. Garabedian about significant scenes from The Promise and the powerful impact that those scenes have had both from the filmmaker's perspective and the educational perspective. Throughout the program, you might feel emotional, have newfound insight, and also feel driven to act. We will watch clips of scenes from the film, special bonus features, and clips of audiovisual testimony from Armenian Genocide survivors and witnesses from the Armenian Film Foundation's collection, which has been digitized and made accessible for educational use in USC Shoah Foundation's Visual History Archive and educational website, Eyewitness. One of our latest programs, as was mentioned, is a Teaching Film with Testimony program, which aims to extend the historical context introduced in films which convey and introduce the history, the processes of genocide, and the human experiences of survivors and witnesses with testimony of survivors and witnesses themselves. As you engage with our program today, I invite you to consider how film and primary source testimony together serve as a valuable educational tool to extend student understanding of the Armenian Genocide, to build empathy, civil responsibility, and agency to be leaders that will inspire positive impact in their communities. At the end of this program, we'll have a 30-minute Q&A, and we invite you to, at that time, ask questions. I would now like to invite Dr. Garabedian to join me on stage as we begin today's program.
Everybody, can you hear me okay? Speak directly, okay. So thank you for coming today. I know we have lots of exciting things going on in Los Angeles this Sunday, so I appreciate you coming to this presentation. For my part, I was very privileged to be a part of this production, which actually was planned for about 3 years before you saw it on screen, and was a sort of secret operation. For most of those years, I was actually not allowed to talk to a single person about it, including my family. So once we actually got underway and we were filming in Spain, Portugal, and a little bit in Malta, words started to get out. Press release actually was done when Krikorian died. He actually died the day after the press release for the movie came out, which was an interesting coincidence. And since then, the movie, after its theatrical release, it's just starting its educational life. And so I'm very happy to be part of this presentation today.
Happy to have you, Dr. Garabedian. Well, first, as we begin, we'd like to know from you, how many of you have seen the film? Just show of hands. Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. So this is a good time to kind of engage in this type of dialogue where we'll really be, for lack of better words, kind of breaking down the film and understanding the behind the scenes, but also contextualizing that with the historical examples from, as we mentioned before, the survivors themselves and the witnesses themselves to kind of really extend our understanding of what the film gives us just a taste of. And so with that, if we can like to invite you to just notice, as you may already know, that the Promise it was directed by Terry George, the Academy Award filmmaker, who also directed Hotel Rwanda. This film is PG-13, which is a very important, significant point in which Dr. Garabedian will really tell us exactly why it was so, and selectively, specifically, why scenes were directed as they were. But also really looking at these many themes. As we noticed as we move through today's program, we're going to kind of dive deep into this film and really understanding the different aspects that the movie addresses. And with each of these different aspects is what we'll contextualize and go deeper into. And so with that, we're going to start with really understanding how the film opens, really with understanding and building this concept of understanding the Ottoman Armenian identity. Then really understanding what are the consequences of us versus them through the rhetoric that is used throughout the movie, from the way that in which the Ottomans and Armenians have social relations in the setting in which they live, how World War I really enters and starts a disruption of regular life, eyewitness reporting, U.S. involvement, courage and resistance, resilience and survival, and most especially the legacy of the Armenian Genocide. So these are not only the themes in which the movie addresses, but which we'll really talk and touch more deeper onto today with today's conversation. So with that, what's really interesting, Carla, about this film is that it's a historical fiction. And why that's interesting is because instead of going from the angle of producing a documentary, for example, that really that this is a movie that's in the mainstream. So what were the challenges of making this maybe a historical fiction rather than a nonfiction documentary?
Initially, the producers wanted to option the rights for the 40 days of Musada. And there's a long and storied history about those rights and how difficult they were to get from the publishers. And this was going back and forth, and I was in conversations. I was working already on the project in secret. And I said, why do you feel you have to option the book? The book was based on a true story of what actually happened. So why not, on the basis of what really happened, give that brief of the Musada story to a screenwriter and have the screenwriter write the movie based on those facts. And that way you completely circumvent, you go around the issue of getting the rights to a fictional book. So that is in fact what happened. And in the end, the screenwriter, who was not Armenian, Oscar-winning writer Robin Swycord, she had a very close friend who was Armenian, and that friend's family history, the Kasarians, they had this story in the family of the boy in the family going to medical school, and that became the spine of the main character, who we'll get to.
Thank you, Carla. And thank you, Dr. Garabetian. So really what this idea, and this really, as you mentioned, and this idea of showing it from this, the historical fiction perspective, it really brought to mind a testimony from the collection. And if any of you have heard of Armenian Genocide survivor Hagop Asadurian, he was born in 1903 in Kayseri, Turkey, and his interview was February 10, 1984. The reason why you'll notice throughout the survivor testimonies today, you'll notice that we've provided the biographical information, which gives you a sense of understanding how old the survivors were during the genocide, but also how old they are when they're giving their testimony as they're being recorded. And so what I'll be doing is going in and out from the PowerPoint to the movies, just so you see that distraction. But why Hagop Asadurian? Well, in this clip, you'll notice that he talks about his experience of writing his own stories, his own memoirs, but through historical fiction, in novels. And let's hear from him as to why.
I have written 14 books. Most of it is about these experiences, naturally. One of them won National Prize of Fiction because if it is not in fiction form, people cannot believe it. Even I cannot believe what happened, through what we went. And the Times people came over here, they took these pictures. Others have. I won National Prize on it, but still, you are not emptied. It feels as though your chest is still full of sorrow, full of experience that has not been told.
And you'll notice that it's mainly audio in that clip of the interview. A certain part of the collection, the filmmaker Michael Hagopian, he would turn the camera off and only have the sound recorder going. So in that particular part of the interview, Hagop Asadurian is his audio only.
So with that, kind of taking Hagop Asadurian's words himself as to why he really chose as a survivor to tell his story through fiction, let's really dive deep into the film and really understanding, whose perspective is this story told from. And with that, can you tell us a little bit more, just generally, about the characters themselves, the main characters?
Terry George was very, he strongly felt that a love triangle was needed to bring life to the story. And he wasn't necessarily following the 40 Days of Musadah, but for those of you who've read the book, there is a love triangle there too. But he felt that this brings out a certain sort of the human condition. It also, it connects to the audience. And so it was important to have, and it didn't start with the Christian Bale character, but the third part of the triangle was an American reporter. So you have an Armenian who is trying to go to medical school, and you have the Armenian French girl, and then you have this American who is the other part of the triangle. So that was very much the director's intervention. He wanted to have that. It didn't start with a triangle. Robin Swycord just had the love story without the third character. The Christian Bale character, he actually is based on an Associated Press journalist. There really was an Associated Press American journalist in Turkey during the genocide, although the screenwriter didn't know that when she was writing initially. But it turns out there was. Abel Schreiner, some of you may be familiar with his memoir. And we ended up using some of that memoir to inform us about the Young Turks and how they socialized, the parties they had, whether they had alcohol at the parties, things like, that you need to know, the granular detail in making a movie, whether, if you have food at these events, what kind of food is it? So we actually used Abel Schreiner, the Associated Press's, the guy's memoirs to help us plan some of the detail of the film. But the Ana Kasarian character is... we've had some mixed reviews about her. Some Armenians think she doesn't really seem Armenian enough. I think to buy into her character, you have to believe that she's lived in France a long time. She's a lost connection to her roots, and she's going back to Turkey to try to find her roots. And of course, she arrives at the worst possible timing ever. So to have this combination of people who all have a different point of view, different agenda, different things that they're trying to get in the movie, that was very much Terry George's, his stamp, if you want to put it that way, that he wanted to have the triangle and he wanted to have this clash of identities in the film.
Thank you, Carla. And then with that, I figured we would actually kind of just address this love triangle in a sense of actually having Terry George himself tell us a little bit more about why he chose to go in this direction, but also emphasizing and kind of reminding us, because we probably haven't seen this film maybe in a while, so just reminding us about those significant scenes from the film and really the impressions of the actors themselves about what this film meant to them. And so with that, we will share a bonus feature that was a part of the promise that really highlights these different aspects that I mentioned.
Always remember, God has given you this mission. May He bless and protect you.
The dynamite is weeping. Be careful.
Thank you.
This film opens just prior to World War I.
You're going to become a doctor?
Yes, it's my passion.
Christopher Myers.
Chris is a star reporter for the Associated Press. A toast to old friends and you.
I told the story through the perspective of a love triangle
You make me feel I've come home.
because I wanted to show how ordinary people, when challenged, find greatness through their reaction to these catastrophic circumstances.
Oh my God, what was that?
If you're engaged in the dilemma between Mikhail and Chris and Anna, these are emotions that people can identify with. And then as the genocide unfolds, they can see the effect on their lives.
It's very dangerous for Armenians right now. I want to get you out of here.
If it's not safe for me, then it's not safe for any of my people.
The story exemplifies the callousness, the crassness, the hardness of the Turkish position against the Armenian people.
Minister, you are using this so-called relocation as a cover for the systematic extermination of the Armenian people.
If you don't learn from your history, you're destined to repeat it.
These things keep happening over and over and over again, every day in the same part of the world, with people fleeing for their lives, families asking the world to help, and the world standing aloof.
Armenians are a tumor in our midst.
You know, you've always got to look for the truth and to remember it for that reason, that you don't want it to happen again.
We cannot be here. We must leave.
No one here is safe. Don't you see what's happening?
Terry wanted for everyone to be able to watch this without that grotesque violence being all that they came away with. That there was a message of hope and of human resilience, and that be what the takeaway is.
Trust me, it's all right. I'm getting us out of here.
I was told that you organized an escape room. How can I help? They want to have a real social impact with this film.
I made a promise.
You want it to move you. You want to feel something.
We'll fight them from every rock.
You want to think something that you haven't thought before.
On fire!
You want a new experience. In terms of the people involved in this film, I would absolutely believe that there's an internal promise that they've made to their ancestors, not to forget.
It's vital that people understand how these Armenian refugees managed to survive, how many of them died, how some of them escaped.
I'm not.
Despite the attempt to wipe them out, they continued to thrive and build and recreate the Armenian nation.
We will build a future together. I promise.
With that kind of reminding us about what the film is about, the power behind the film, and really what it stands for, let's dive into the movie. So, as we see in the very beginning, how the movie opens is with this introduction to a place in the Ottoman Empire called Sirun, and that place is where we find Michael Boghosian, the main character. Can you tell us a little bit more about Sirun and the different reasons as to why was it even named Sirun, and just a little bit more about where could it have been geographically?
This place actually that you're seeing here is a digital creation. I don't even want to say recreation. It's a digital creation. It doesn't exist. So when you looked at it, and if it looked real, I'm happy that you thought that. Sirun was named after a Musada village. We did not want to use any real geographical names, although there were a few that came into the movie. And we went back and forth about this. I feel that Armenian place names are important, but they also carry with them certain allegiances. So rather than saying Kesab, we called it Basek, which is Kesab spelled backwards, and things like that. I mean, there's sort of anagrams throughout the film. I mean, looking back at it, I think probably most people wouldn't have cared, but I certainly wouldn't have liked to have had Harpert or Bitlis or any of these places just thrown around in movie terms. So there was so Sirun, which we all know what that means, or for those of you who don't speak Armenian, a lovely, beautiful, and it's supposed to be the picturesque, beautiful town that our main character comes from, and is iconically the home that he's trying to return to. And it was very important in this story, as in most war stories, to show what happens before war, and teaching about genocide. This is important too, as you know, that students, for them to understand what was normal, what was considered normal before the war, before the genocide started. And so to show the engagement party, the fact that he's paid a certain amount of dowry for the engagement, the promise he gets the money for medical school. This is the way that things were done in those days. And to see the textile store in the Grand Bazaar, everything that was supposed to be normal life, so that when you see things starting to dissemble and fall apart, you understand the baseline of where that's coming from.
And also in the sense that allows us to have the characters be humanized for us. and then we follow them throughout their journey because we know their origin, we know where they started. And with that, I'd like to share Armenian survivor Girard Zortyan share his experience, his memories from what life was like before the Armenian Genocide. Before, as he recalls it, he was born in April 14, 1911 in Kütahya, Turkey. And you see that he was interviewed February 15, 1991. Let's test the sound here.
My mother used to cook all types of Armenian dishes, which were great, wonderful, and nostalgic memories of my past. I loved the Armenian things that were not that are not restaurantable today. They took an awful long time to do. Many of our contests had to do with gatherings where we children were always taken. We weren't left home. And then we would also have these contests where the elderly would tell these wonderful old stories that were sometimes made usually for adult people. And when we were supposed to be sleeping in another room with a babysitter, I would wake up and walk to the door and listen to these fascinating stories. Also, we had picnics, long, just incredible number of people. We'd go up into the mountains, we'd dig a hole and put this huge crock with all types of vegetables and meats and so on, and cook it semi-underground. And all through the day, people would eat meze, it's called, hors d'oeuvres, drinking raki, and we'd dance on oriental rugs, and then certain groups of people would be in one place, and then other groups would be in a hill next to it and so on. And at night, we would start singing some Armenian songs that would be, we would sing certain stanzas of it, and groups in the other mountain would echo and sing the second verses, etc. Anyway, these are the pleasant things that happened in Armenia.
Some of you may recall that Girard Zortyan used to have these big parties. He continued here in the Los Angeles area. He was quite a character. And I know my mother went to one of these parties and says it was, he tried to resurrect the old, the barbecue and the dancing and all of that. He really was a genocide survivor who clearly came through the other end of his experience and seemed to have come through rather well and lived a happy life.
And Girard Zortyan's testimony this clip in particular is a very rare gem, a part of the AFF collection that we have in Eyewitness specifically, and used for educational purposes because, as we were talking about, it really just demonstrates for students really the understanding that these are real people. These are people, they're more than just the numbers or facts that they read about in their books, but they're people with memories and real special memories, and that can resonate and connect with the students themselves who have families, who have memories of their own. And so with that, you are just naturally able to empathize with the person. And so To build onto the next scene of the film, or as we now see Michael progressing into the next stage of the film, where he goes and embarks on a trip to Istanbul to be a medical student. But before he does that, he goes into the Grand Bazaar. And I invite you to watch, as we watch this this scene in which Michael enters into Istanbul. Notice what you see, and also notice the type of rhetoric and the social relations that are going on between the Turks, the Armenians, and the Armenians themselves.
Yes, I'm going to the Grand Bazaar. No, sorry. No, thank you.
Ah, my friend. Better prices here.
No.
Better prices here.
I'm going here.
This Armenian dog will rob you.
Get back to your thieves, there. Always trying to steal my costumes. Please, what can I sell you today?
Are you Mr. Mesrop Bogosian?
Mesrop Bogosian, yes. What, is it the bill?
No. This is from my father, Vartan Bogosian. I'm Mikhail.
Your Vartan's son?
Yes.
Why didn't you say so? Speak up! Come here!
Before we talk about the language, you notice the hat that Oscar Isaac, the actor playing Mikhail Bogosian, you notice the hat he's wearing. Endless debates and discussion about whether the Armenian main character should wear a fez. Because as many of you know, that was the hat that everybody wore. It wasn't necessarily tied to being Armenian or not. And so if we were being absolutely accurate, he should have been wearing a fez. The other thing about him, and this, again, the director had, and he's not Armenian, so he had his, very strong views about the audience and what would resonate with the audience. He did not want the Armenian character to wear a fez, and he did not want the Armenian character to have a mustache. And of course, in those times, most men, as fashion had it, had a mustache and possibly a beard as well. But Terry George didn't think that would make him sympathetic, or it might confuse the Turk and the Armenian. So we went back and forth about this. I believe we should be as accurate as possible. He says, no, you're being too accurate. You're not thinking about the audience. But the reason that said I wanted to show this scene was to show that the sort of antagonism between Turks and Armenians right before the genocide actually broke out. It was there, it was nascent, it was it was latent. If it wasn't out in the open, it was underneath the business dealings between people. Why are you buying from that dog? And so the language, and the sort of threat underneath it was sort of always there. And you can see parallels with the Holocaust as well. Jews in the community and the way that these snipes and these sort of the latent hostility was also there in the German population, that they were targeted before it happened, but it was never out in the open in such an obvious way.
And though in the scene where he says, "Don't go to this Armenian dog; he'll rob you," the impact there is a very quick turnover. It's very quick in the way that moment passes. Just as a viewer, it's like you know that something's going on, but you don't necessarily get the whole full impact of what it actually means. What does it actually mean to be an Ottoman Armenian in that moment? What did Michael feel when he said that? Or what did his uncle feel when he said that? And to really contextualize that moment, I'd like to share with you a survivor story, Arshak Dikranyan's story, of what he recalls with his father when he is in the Konya station in Konya, and his father is selling a rug in the bazaar.
One day, we were desperate. hungry, didn't have a lot of money. My father, we had a small rug that had a little value, and my father took the rug, and he took me with him too. And by bribe, we got out of the Konya station and went to the flea market to sell the rug, to buy some, to have some cash money, buy some bread and things like the provisions. We went to the flea market. My father opened the rug on the ground and was waiting for a customer. A Turkish gendarme came with uniform. He took a fancy to the rug and he wanted the rug himself without paying. My father refused to give, saying, "Efendi, çocuklarım içindir bunlar, ekmek alacağım, acıdılar, hiç çocuğum vardır." "Efendi, sir, this is for my children, I want to buy bread, I'm out of money, I need this to sell this." The policeman got angry. He says, "Get out of here, you gavur. Cehenneme git." So my father had to wrap up, rolled the rug and went to a few further out, a couple blocks away, and he opened the rug again, still waiting for a customer. This man, policeman, was watching him. He followed my father and hauled him right from the chest and said, "Ulan gavur, sana siktir demedim mi?"
Okay.
All right.
Survivors, are you ready, Michael?
Yeah, you ready? Rolling?
Yes, rolling.
All right. Go ahead.
Survivors, Archie Dekranian, scene 46, take 7.
Okay. Okay, Archie. Ulan gavur, siktir ol buradan. Sana demedim mi yasaktır burada satmaya? And he held my father from the throat and slapped one on each side, strong slap. My father looked at me with tears in his eyes. He said, "Son," he says, "you see this, don't ever forget it." And to this day, I haven't been able to forget it.
Yeah, I chose to really share that clip, as before mentioned, just to really extend the understanding of the impact of that moment, but also to demonstrate to students as well within different resources that we produce, part of the Teaching Film with Testimony program, to really have the students understand specifically what I really love about this quote actually is the end, in which he says, I have never forgotten what had happened that day. And for that powerful message for me just really resonated by really allowing me to understand the sense of personal responsibility that not only Arshak Dikranyan feels, but what I feel as well, and what we Armenians collectively feel is that personal responsibility to make sure that that moment is never forgotten. And I think the film as well does a wonderful job as it allows us to also enter through this journey, again, empathizing with the different characters to feel this sense of responsibility. But we'll kind of glance through the next couple scenes in which we see now that World War I has started. It's 1914. It's October, late October, October 29, 1914, where war has broken out. And we start to see this ideology of the Young Turks start to come through. Carla, would you like to share with us a little bit more about the characters, the Young Turk party characters themselves, and what went into that, and what was the aim with including them?
Well, there are actually very few moments in the film where you can tell the audience why this is happening, why the Turks are targeting the Armenians. And for an American audience, a non-Armenian audience who really didn't understand any of it, or a lot of people didn't know anything about the genocide, you have to give them a little short history lesson. And so we actually had a longer scene than is actually in the film. You can see a bonus clip if you buy the DVD, a longer explanation between the Young Turk leaders about why the Armenians are being targeted. That when in the first cut of the film, it felt too long. It felt like a history lesson. So, I mean, the other challenge, of course, is that we are very familiar with what these people actually looked like. So to cast the Talat character, who you see later, was a challenge, especially when you're working with Spanish, a mainly Spanish cast of extras. So, so while the main characters were not Spanish, the extras were mainly cast in Spain. So that was a challenge. But I think that the reason that was given to actually label the Armenians as traitors, and to show the racism that was underneath it, that they could not be trusted, that there was that, which is a political issue, but also to bring in the racist element to the so-called final solution. That was important to show in this scene.
Yep, and in the essence of time, I think we would have shown the deleted scene, but definitely make sure that you look out for it at home on your DVD, going into the details. But I do want to also mention in this moment that in the film, as we know, there are many different types of characters as well. It's not only the dark young Turk, pan-Turkist ideology that we see, but we also see those good Turks. And specifically in this case, this general's son is a representative of those characters that really reaches out to help. And he doesn't even know that he can, but he finds ways in which he's able to help. And with that, what I'd like to say, what we like to say with the students, is that he's not a bystander. He actually is an upstander, because he does something about what he sees. And with that, I'd like to highlight talk a little bit about the eyewitness reporting. Those who didn't just stand by, they did something with whatever ability that they had, whether that was with a camera, whether that was through reporting. And so, Carla, you mentioned a little bit, you talked to us a little bit about the inspiration behind the Chris Myers character, and how it was real. What was it like filming this particular scene that we see here with Chris kind of going and seeing the homes that have been blown, the items that have been taken away? What was it like?
Well, first of all, the set design and the props were all taken from real life artifacts and photographs. So part of my job was to supply those to the people. So the actual text you see on that placard is taken from a real life hanging document. And then we supplied to Christian Bale, the actor, a lot of information. In fact, he came to the Ararat Esquejan Museum one afternoon, sat with Maggie and myself for 3.5 hours, quizzing us about everything he could think of about the genocide. He wanted to know the ins and outs of it and what we thought. And he also saw some of the things in the museum, and he built his character very sort of scientifically, technically. He's a technical actor, so he needs to have that detail in order to act the part. That camera was a real camera from the period, and it was bought in a flea market. I found out this is a lot of what prop masters do. They travel the world looking for props. They go to flea markets. So for him, it was important that not only was the detail of, the hanging sign correct for us, but that he had the right clothes, the right camera, all of that. And we also know about this particular instance, which is fictional. It's a fictional circumstance, but it was based on a number of eyewitness accounts. That it was possible, although we didn't have a lot of instances like this, for a journalist to actually happen on a massacre after it happened. In real life, that's very rare. As a person who's reported in the field, most of the time you are coming onto the scene, if not days, usually weeks after a real life massacre has happened. So things that you would see like this, of the burning smoke and some of the, plucking out something from the ashes, probably would not happen. But we do know that that Western journalists were there, and we know that missionaries were there, and it's their accounts later in their diaries and their letters that the detail of what they saw came out then.
And with that, there's so much that we owe to those journalists and so much that we owe to those photographs that were taken during that time, and specifically by one very specific individual who is personally a role model. And I like to always talk about him with students that we present to at USC Shoah Foundation, a part of our junior intern program, and that is Armin Wegner himself. Is very rare as well. Another gem in this collection is the actual audiovisual testimony of Armin Wegner. And as many of you don't know, he was a German nurse who came a part of the German Army, the German Red Cross, to be on scene during World War I. And he had a camera, and he was able-bodied, and he saw what was going on to the Armenians. And he took action. And despite all the odds against him, he demonstrated courage, and he was able to document so much of what we have of the photographs from the Armenian Genocide and the atrocities. And he actually carried those photographs under his belt. But what did that experience, what was that like? What did that mean for him to be a witness? Let's have Armin Wegner share that himself.
I came in Turkey as a member of the German Red Cross, and in this quality I came through the whole desert of Mesopotamia and was a witness of the terrible persecution of the poor Armenian people and saw the terrible sacrifice. A witness is a very difficult task. I could never more forget what I have seen. I was always willing to speak of this terrible thing and to say to the peoples, don't care that not a second time the same terrible thing can repeat.
And with that, he is talking about the Holocaust, in which he himself also witnessed. And he was the only one, actually, it's very interesting, I recently learned this, he's the only one who wrote a direct letter to Hitler to stop what he was doing and the acts of anti-Semitism and the Nuremberg laws. He was actually the only German citizen who wrote against this. So he is definitely an example of someone who takes action and demonstrates courage. And also in that scene, I just want to also add the experience of what it was like in that moment as an Armenian to be a part of that scene in which all of you saw them taken out of their homes, their items all over the place. What was that like? And that experience, I'll have Alice Shipley, Armenian Genocide survivor, share her experience and what she noticed about how they were, her feelings about how they were getting ready for the deportation route. And I feel that this clip also does add to our understanding of that moment and what that experience was like.
Early part of 1915, the Turks began to take all the professors, doctors, lawyers, all the intelligentsia into prisons. And after they had butchered them in very horrible manner, then they began to take, they took all the men who were not professionals, boys 12 years of age up to 72 years of age men, and destroyed them. And then which left the women and children unprotected. Then they began to take the wealthy families out first and destroy them. And then before taking them out, they would come and write Sovket on everybody's door. That meant exile, which meant that the following day they were going to be taken out, and everybody had to be ready. Of course, they had everybody sell their belongings. We took our 11-room house, emptied all the rooms and took them all down. And the auctioneer came and sold everything. We got $45 out of the whole 11-room house furnishings, and about 3 donkeys. And the Turks took 2 donkeys away from us. That left us with 1.
Yeah, it's that detail that you get from a testimony. And actually, it's that detail that you need in movie making as well, because it's one thing to have the abstract notion of being deported, but the idea that you mark somebody's door, and then then they all try to sell their stuff, and you hear the story of how that actually worked.
The next part of the film in which we start to see, the impact of these, the escalation of the violence and the massacres. Now, going from deportation and that forced removal to now we see acts of violence and acts of large mass-scale massacres occurring, and many people, witnessed what was going on with the Armenians at the time, and we did mention, those witnesses, those who took action, those who took photographs. But what about others, like other civilians that were in the area? And with that, I'd like to share Neum Sukar, who was an Arab witness. He was born in 1911 in Zala, Lebanon, and he actually lives in the area very close to, or lived at that time, in the area close to Deir Zor. And so allow him to really speak to what he witnessed, what he saw happening to the Armenian people.
We lived close to the river, the Euphrates. My brother and I and some of the kids would go swimming in the river, and lo and behold, we used to see bodies floating down the river, and we tried to swim to them, but the current was so fast that we couldn't catch up with them, and it was like a bunch of fish or something, they were so big. Finally, we got to someone, and it was like the body was deteriorated, and we let it go, and my brother and I says, leave it go, because the current has taken us further down the stream, and we had to stop right there and come back home again. See, we had to do a lot of walking, and God help them. There were a bunch of people that were floating down the river. Armenians. I would assume they were Armenians, but nobody else,
And I think that testimony also helps us understand that scene, which is leading to the massacre scene, in which we see all the people of Sirun that have been taken out and killed along the deportation route. Can you tell us more about that scene and what it really took from the actors' perspective or the filmmakers' perspective, the toll that it had on them and their experience?
Well, the director before The Promise, had made the film Hotel Rwanda, which had a rating of R. And because it had an R rating, that meant that its life educationally, it was very short. You couldn't really do a lot with it. You couldn't show it in schools. And so he came into The Promise, and with the producers, they decided they wanted the rating to be PG-13. PG-13 means there's certain rules about how much violence you can show, and language as well. So it became a constraint. But we tried in this scene to show a massacre, but to not show it too graphically. And I think there's been a certain controversy about, did we show enough violence? I'm a person who likes to show more rather than less. And I argued strongly for showing the bodies unclothed, or certainly stripped, because that's what would have happened. And initially the bodies there was a combination of stunt people. We were actually in a forest. We were in very cold weather in Spain, up in the high mountains. And we had stunt people as well as prosthetic bodies. And we had children as well. So we decided that they should be stripped to like their underclothes. And we also had a scene with vultures that did not make the final cut. But the vultures were supposed to land on the semi-clothed dead bodies, which happened a lot. You could often trace where the dead bodies were by the jackals, the wild dogs, and the vultures. It was a way to tell, where the massacres were. But a day before we shot this scene, Terry George, the director, decided that he did not want to have the bodies stripped. It was going to be too much. And what we didn't know was that the vultures were only trained to land on unclothed bodies, so it was take another 3 days to retrain them. They are very flighty birds, and they had to be retrained to land on clothed mannequins. So this it was a small point, and in the end of the day, we didn't even show the vulture scene. But it was a challenge. And the other thing about the scene was that if you notice in the Promise, there's very little blades going into flesh. It's a lot of bullets. And we know in the genocide that's not really what happened. It was a cheap way of killing a lot of people in a short amount of time, and a lot of that was done with bayonets and farm tools, little axes, things like that. And bullets were used, but bullets were expensive. So, but if you were to watch the film, you get the idea that people died fairly, painlessly. As in this massacre scene, you hear some gunshots, and then the next thing you know, the main characters are running down and they see a heap of bodies, and everybody is just like asleep. So people had an issue with that. But I think on that flip side of it, for that PG-13 rating, you could argue that if it allows us to talk about something so horrible and to show it to a younger audience, mind you, a younger audience sees a lot of Marvel comic movies where there's a lot of gratuitous violence that is totally unrealistic, with people being killed left, right, and center. But this was a realistic depiction of violence, and the decision was made to show it in that more sanitized way. So that was part of the challenge. The other challenge was that these two actors you see here from, this is a film, the film side of a discussion, they work in very different ways. Christian Bale is, as I described before, a technical actor. He built his character from the outside in. He gets his costume and his camera. He gets everything that makes the character from the outside in. He constructs his character like that. Oscar Isaac's the exact opposite. He's what we call a method actor. So he has to feel the emotions of the Mikhail Bogosian character, the emotions of what it would feel like to discover your wife and all your family members butchered in a heap of bodies. And then he has to be by himself for hours before you shoot the scene so that he can get into the moment. And I know this because he hung out in my tent, my little producer tent in the corner, so he wanted to escape anybody, talking to him, and I didn't talk to him. So two very different ways of acting. And what that means from a directing point of view is the director has to know this. For the Mikhail character, you basically have 1 or 2 takes, because he's got all that emotion bottled up and he's just going to give it on the first take, and maybe you get it on a second take. For the Christian Bale character, he can keep doing it over and over and over again because he's got his character down. So it's a bit of a challenge when you have 2 completely different actors working in different ways. But in fact, the scene that's in the film is the first take of Oscar Isaac's performance.
Thank you, Dr. Garavelyan, for that. And I think it's so interesting to know those different points, because you don't really understand what it is that they feel, and to see it from their perspective as well, and the impact that this history and this story has had on them, and how they put that into their work, and how they purposely feel now that they know this, and they're even playing the characters, going back to that point of they now have a responsibility. And that it is to then demonstrate the realism of this moment, and of the massacre scene. And with that, like as we know, so many of the U.S. There were many people that are part of the missionaries who were there from the United States. One very important character that does come into play in the film is Henry Morgenthau, the U.S. ambassador to America at this time, stationed in the Ottoman Empire. And that really one scene that is and as we know, very famous dialogue, or a very famous moment, moments that were exchanged in history between Talat Pasha and Henry Morgenthau himself, really exchanging conversations and Morgenthau pleading with Talat Pasha to stop what he's doing. And to kind of go through understanding what that moment was like for Henry Morgenthau himself, I'd like to actually share with you another rare gem in the collection, and that's Henry Morgenthau's grandson, Henry Morgenthau III, how he shares what he recalls with conversations with his grandpa, with Henry Morgenthau, what that experience of talking to Talat Pasha was like.
I can remember well his telling me his great frustration and sadness in not being able to make an impression on Talat and not being able to influence this man who, for reasons which one can never really understand completely, although the obvious reasons are, the official reasons are there, was bent on completely destroying, using the most brutal and vicious means, a complete people. At one point he mentioned to Talat that they were killing not only the men, but innocent women and children. And Talat's answer was, well, they may be innocent today, but who knows what they will be tomorrow.
And with that, that kind of takes us into understanding the moments of resistance, knowing that and how resistance comes through in the film. And I think that it does symbolize specifically with the Musadagh scene, the Musadagh resistance, that Armenians didn't just stand by. And that there were those that did take action, and with whatever they could, with those who had the means and the resources to do that. And I just want to also share that we, to really further contextualize that, I'm hearing from a survivor who was actually there as a child during that time on the mountain, and what his role was. So we'll hear from Yeznik Boyabjian, who was born in 1902 in Musadagh, in Hatay.
Lerambra in derkis unesto draknere ուրախ էին կարծես թե հասնիկ էր եղածը սովորականին բես իրար գխային եւ միան կորձերնից գրվոներուն երագուր գտանեինք այսեր ուրեմն Türkiye'de քանի մտեղի գարցագին անշուշտ ամեն օր չէր երբեմն շատ զորավոր գարցագին ուրեմն այն դեղեն որ շատ զորավոր հարցակում գար մենք ունեինք խումբ գազագնային խումբ կսեին 33 հոգի կպականար ուրեմն այն դեղերը որ Թշնամին զորավոր էր անում կոնգրեսային ուրեմն Թշնամին գծեր որ մենք ամեն դեղ միևնույն զորություն ունենք այս ծավալը գխապվեին
Քանի թուրք զինվոր կար
2000-ի չափ զինվոր կար, ամենավերջը ավելի շատ զինվոր մեր վրա հասցակեցան, վերջին գրիվներ որ եղավ, ուրեմն մենք գրիվը շնագենք, միս կողմեն, ըսի քիչ առաջ, մեր ժողով ունեինք, ժողովականները գային, ժողովուն եզերքը երկու պլաններում վրա տրոշակներ բարձած էինք, անգլերեն եւ ֆրանսերեն գրված, այստեղ փոքրիկ ժողովուրդ մնե, մենք Թշնամին դեմ կգրվենք, եթե գալի մեզ օգնեցեք Դրազեին կարմիր խաչ տրոշակը եւս անոր հետ միասին։ Ուրեմն օրբերտ ֆրանսական զրահանավեր գասին զինվորները մեկը գնշմարե որ բազմություն մգա։ Իսկ մենք լորտներ ունեինք, լորտներեն քանի մկի ձով իջանս 20 լոհար դեպի նավակ եստան։ Այսպեսով գրսան հարաբերություն հաստատել նավերուն հետ։ Այդ կացողները նավու մեջ ելան դերգություններ դրին թե ինչ կնենք ու ինչ կլանք որ Մեզի լուր դին որ 8 դորը սպասեցեք 8 դորը ցեզի բետիազի գուդան գրվեցեք մենք ացեզի գոկնենք միան մեզի ցուցեք թե ուր գան Թշնամին ուր զորք ունի
Yeah. So that is when I saw that clip for the very first time, for me, I was just like, wow, there's a testimony that we have of a survivor who actually talks about the experience on the mountain. And so with that, just knowing that, being able to hear from him himself, what he saw, what he witnessed, and what his role was as a child on the mountain, it just goes to demonstrate that what it took to be what it means to be a survivor, and that everyone is involved in this whole, in the predicament that they're in, the circumstances that they're in, and everyone is there for each other to help and to support in whatever way they can. And to kind of move through, that really brings us to the point of understanding how survival is shown in the film, and the meaning of survival, and that being through the orphans specifically. And as we kind of gloss through the rest to get to the end, that final scene from the film of what it means to survive and the legacy that carries. Carla, could you share with us just a little bit about the orphans and the perspective from the actors themselves, the child actors, and what that meant for them?
Well, first there was a discussion about whether what physical shape we should show orphans are these, because the Musada children had not been put on the deportation, so it's not as if you're going to be showing children who have been rescued from, the march. Or from the desert, or so they wouldn't have. At first, Terry George thought they should have their heads shaved. They should look, like Holocaust, emaciated children. That wasn't factually correct. And in fact, we thought that these orphans would have been, in the historical period that we were showing, they would have been orphans who would have gone from Zeytun to Marash and had been caught up in that particular deportation, and they would have been in bad shape but not terrible shape. So to not show them with shaved heads and emaciated. And the pastor, the Protestant minister that we show in the film, was modeled after Pastor Merrill, who did save Armenian orphans and in that part of the world. And so we wanted to make it as close as we could get to the orphanage that he had, and to have his character be a real character. And also the deputy governor that we show, the Turkish deputy governor who is helping to rescue the orphans, was based on an actual character. So we wanted that to be as factually accurate as possible. The children that we used in the film, there are strict labor laws, as there should be, even in Spain, the European Union, about you can't use children beyond 10 p.m. at night. And we had a lot of night scenes, especially the rescue scene. So we had to be very careful how we use the children. And in the scenes where there was a lot of violence, we had there was an adult with each child. We also had to have child psychologists on hand to explain what was going on, so that you just don't have children, surrounded by either bodies, or in the Musada scene where they're being rescued, we didn't have actual artillery. We had obviously movie artillery with explosions going off, but it was actually pretty realistic being on location. And what are these children supposed to think about this? So we tried to be very careful about not traumatizing these kids. Although you assume that children know what make-believe is, you still have to be ethically responsible in working with them. So that was a challenge.
And to really characterize that experience, I'd like to bring in the testimony of Arpine Terlemezyan, who actually was born in the Eastern Empire, the Russian Empire of Armenia, and she actually finds herself in a Near East relief orphanage, as serving as a maidik, as one of those teachers who was who was a leader, or someone who was able to support the orphans. And I wanted to share just her experience, and she really hearing her testimony actually reminded me of Anna's character, because of Anna's very nurturing, and she's there for the orphans, and wants to be supportive of them and what they're going through, by also kind of just being with them in their moment and bringing in the present. So I'd like to bring in this clip.
Երբ որ ես կառավարիչի օգնականուհի էի որփանոցի մեջ, տղամը կար, մոտավորապես 12-13 տարեկան, գիշերները հանկարծ խելագարված, կարթնար գիտեր, որ իր մայրը սպանված է թուրքերի կողմեն, Բայց մայրս փորալով դուրս կվազեր փողոց, որպեսզի գնա մայրը փնտրի։ Մեր կողմեն կվազեինք, ետևեն կբռնեինք, ետ կբերեինք տղային։ Խեղճը գուլար, մենք հալ իրեն հետ գուլայինք։ Այդ չափ դժբախտություններ։
And I'd like to have that clip take us into that final scene of the movie, in which we'll watch and kind of remind us of what it means again what does it mean to survive a genocide, and what does that carry when you are a survivor? What is the message that carries?
Well, between all of us here, I'll tell you a little known fact about the film. In the first iterations, the first drafts of the movie, all the characters survive. All the three main characters survive, including the Anna character. And it was the belief of the producers that they should all find a way. And initially, Anna is separated, and we think she's died. But he sees her many years later, kind of in a, Dr. Zhivago kind of way, and sees her on a street, and Anna has survived, even though it's many years later, and they've been separated. And then we got some reaction to this, and especially amongst Armenians, some of the reaction we got was, there cannot be such a happy ending to a genocide story, because you're suggesting that you have three people and all of them survive. So you're suggesting that in some way is statistically representative, which it wouldn't have been. So poor Anna had to go. And then it became a matter of how would she go, and whether it works or not is for the audience to decide. But I know that Terry George was absolutely intent that the last scene take place in Watertown, and that Watertown, that you should see these characters at least in some form or another, that the children who are now grown up, and that there should be some optimistic note that you can survive something like this and have a life, but you never completely are healed from it. And I think that's probably a very representative thing to say about genocide survivors, that while his character seems to be pretty intact, there were many, and I'm sure you could attest to this, those of you in the audience, if you've known genocide survivors, they are forever scarred by their experiences. So I think he wanted to show at one sense that life goes on, but that the memory of those you've lost, it's always with you.
And with that, let's watch this clip.
While reporting on the Spanish Civil War, I adopted Yeva, finished my medical studies, and set up a practice in Watertown, Massachusetts. After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, Yeva joined the Women's Army Corps and fell in love with a young Marine lieutenant. And on her wedding day, the orphans joined us in celebration. A toast in Armenian? Աստված օրհնե եւ պաշտպանե մեր զավակները եւ աղոթենք որանոնք ապահով վերադառնան մեզի. May they return safely to us. My darling Yeva told me that her greatest wish was that her parents and our dear were here. I told her I know that they are, for sure they are here. And all of your parents and all those families lost in an attempt to wipe our nation from the face of the earth. But we're still here. We're still here.
personally, Oscar Isaac made me believe that he was Armenian. After watching that, I was just a complete fan. But what that really shows beyond that, of course, is just the power and the legacy of, again, going back to that point of being personally responsible. And to end tonight's presentation, I'd like to end with a final clip of testimony, and that is from a survivor descendant. Matthew Derman-Willian is a descendant. He's a third-generation descendant, is what I understand from his testimony. He's recorded, J. Michael Hagopian records him in conversation with his friends in 1975. And as I was watching this clip with this group in discussion, it really just reminded me of today's conversation that people kids my age, or that we had or still have, and even continuing generational descendants have currently, are today's kids too. Or it just reminds me of the same types of conversations that we have, because we still, generation after generation, still feel the impact and still feel that responsibility that we have, and to make sure that it is known that we survived, but also to make a mark and to share with others the importance of survival and to help others. And with that, I'd like to just end with Matthew Derman-Willian really sharing what it means as a descendant. What does it mean to be responsible?
The present, Turkish government, first of all, they will deny anything that has happened, and then, in France, in Marseille last year, the Turkish ambassador left the country because Armenians erected a monument at Marseille. And the present attitude that, Armenians really never existed there, and, and all that. That's the thing I think our community as a whole should deal with first. Because, to bring to the facts that Armenians did exist there. There was a flourishing empire at one time, and they were massacred, during World War I, and the Turks never acknowledged this.
Not only did they never acknowledge it, but they never, it's one thing to say you're sorry, after you do something. It's another thing not to say anything. And when how does my grandfather feel? Does he feel human? Someone kills him. Someone kills his mother. He saw his mother killed, his brothers killed. Someone kills them all off. And then they don't even say, I'm sorry. They go on like they never existed. Or they're animals. They're not worth saying they're sorry about. Forget giving them money, giving them their land back. Forget that. They don't even have... What kind of dignity can a person like that, take with him? Psychologically, what has that done? And I think it's worn off on us, too. I think some of that comes down to us.
If someone kills someone, then says he's sorry, you can believe him?
No, but it's one thing.
That's the point.
What is the point? Is like what we were saying about Hitler. After he ordered the death units to start working in Poland. He said, after all, who today remembers the Armenians, the extermination of the Armenians? The world believes in success only. And when you leave something like that unanswered, and especially when something like that, I think Hitler puts that question very clearly before us. I think for humanity's sake, we have an obligation to make the world remember, and for justice to be done, not just for Armenians. I think it's a very important for humanity.
Yeah. And then with that, I think that Matthew Derman-Willian really sets up, for him, what it means to keep the promise, and where, for me myself, with that in mind, what the promise means to me in the line of work that I'm engaged in is to make sure that the resources that are being developed, that they are used properly, they're used effectively, and they're used by teachers who know how to use them. So with that, I'm taking resources like this, taking the film and putting testimony along with it to extend that historical understanding. What we hope is that the students will also be able to learn in different ways, through being engaged with film, through being secondary sources, through being engaged with primary sources, to really develop that what it means to them to take agency. What are issues for them that they feel need to be addressed, and to take action, that civic responsibility. And by building really close empathetic relationships with these characters and with the testimonies themselves of the survivors. So with that, it's 5:30, Maggie. We did it. We did it. So thank you, everybody, for being a part of today's discussion. So.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Zorthian, what's his first name? Giray Zorthian. I've seen a very, very interesting clip where he talks about his eyewitness, what happened to his dad and his brother. Have you seen that?
It might be in that whole interview.
No.
Separate from the Hagopian interview?
It was not in the interview you had here. But that's very, very interesting, and I hope you will include that here, because he is talking about when he was 4 years old in Turkey and what he witnessed about his father and his brother. I think I saw that one time at Abril, maybe.
I remember that. I was there for that.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that was very, very important for me. I hope you can include that. Thank you.
Thank you.
One question I have is, have any of you guys seen the movie by Elia Kazan, America, America, about his Greek uncle going through this? It sort of reminded me of that. So have you seen that?
Yes. It's a really great film. I think
Yeah,
you should see that film.
And when, because as you know, the Turkish lobby has kept it from being seen over all these years, but it just happened to be shown during the American movie classic channel, and they showed it, and then it's gone, and then it's like, but that kind of reminded me, this movie kind of reminded me of that.
Said, I've got a question for you. You showed that clip by Nahum Zakkar, the Lebanese born in Zahle. You said that he was born in 1911. So 5 years, he would have been 4 years old to have gone from Zahle to Deir Zor. It's not a very short distance. You think that's accurate, what he's saying? Because it makes me question a little bit, how can he remember that good at the age of 4, far distance to go from Zahle to Deir Zor? It's not that easy to go, especially at those days.
Talking about Neam Sukar. Yeah, I mean, it's not clear what year he actually witnessed the events, but his interview is very detailed. I mean, so it's possible that we're not just talking about 1915. It could have been later than that. He talks about witnessing burnt bodies. They would go into Deir Zor, he lived in Deir Zor, as I understand, if I recall his testimony. He lived in Deir Zor, and they would go out into the desert, he and his friends, and they would see the Armenians camped out. So, I mean, I guess the question is, how long were Armenians in the desert? And did that go into, there are probably people here who can answer that question. So it wasn't just 1915. It went on beyond that.
And speaking to the point of, what we have on record is that he is born in 1911. This is the date that we believe that has been written down, that he gave to say when he was born. And a lot of times across the different testimonies that we have, some survivors don't really know exactly what year they were born. Maybe it's a close number, but what I'm trying to say with that is that a lot of times in these testimonies there can be inaccuracies and there can be accuracies. With that, the part of the learning then is to bring about different types of resources that students can corroborate, that they can look to build onto the understanding, okay, well, Neam Sukar said this, he was born here, can I look at a different resource to connect or to draw elicit different information that can validate what he's saying, or kind of doing this kind of cross comparison. So sometimes it's true, we have these. Was he born in 1911? Was he not? Was he 4 years old actually in the river? you know, taking what he's saying as a testimony, that's his story. And so we can only take what his story is and then build on that with extending the learning beyond that with other sources.
It's a good question. And the good thing about this archive is that it's entirely searchable, meaning that every minute of testimony has a keyword attached to it. So you could search for other accounts that use the words drowning, river, whatever, and compare accounts by survivors through this particular archive. There aren't other archives like that. For people also who are interested in genealogy, there's a conference going on next week, the Armenian Genealogy Conference. Some of you may be there. And one of the things we're going to be presenting the Shoah's archive to help people try to find out about their families, partly through searching the archive. So if you may know a place, or you may know a person's, the year they were born, or you may know a family name, and you can actually plug those search words in and come up with, if it's there, it'll come up. So that's actually one thing that's very unique about this archive.
But thank you for bringing that to attention.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm Pastor Magardichian, and I'm glad to hear about Kesab as well, being from Kesab. Thank you for this. My question is, you explained concerning the mustache issue and showing the Armenian without mustache, but at the same time showing the American journalist with mustache. Once you come to the Massachusetts, you see the American people without mustache. So what was behind this? Why the American journalist with mustache showing kind of...
That's a very good question. And actually, Christian Bale had 3 different stages of his beard. He came onto the set with a very long, shaggy beard, like a mountain man kind of beard. And he purposely grew it long so that we could decide whether, how he should look. He modeled himself, if you know, Ambassador Morgenthau had a kind of goatee beard. So Christian Bale saw that, and he came, the test, he shows up a week before with this long, long beard. And I said, and I had a reaction to it. This is an aesthetic thing partly. It's nothing to do with what really happened. It was an aesthetic reaction to it. I said, there's no way Christian Bale should have that long, straggy, ugly beard, because I don't think the audience will react well to it. We've got our star, let's make him look as good as we can. So that's not a very scientific approach, but that was one way that it was approached. But basically, he was modeled after a diplomat of the times, Morgenthau, and he wanted to look distinguished. So the American journalist had the beard. And as far as the Armenians went, and I have to say I just lost this battle. I think maybe the director, Terry George, had a point. Do we think more negatively of somebody who has a mustache and is wearing a fez, even though that's the way Armenians looked? It's very stereotypical. He says, I don't care. I don't want him to have to look like a Turk. But frankly, I think that the audience is intelligent enough to make the distinction. But he did not want that to be the case. And the other difference we had was in the dressing of Anna Kasarian. I actually was of the opinion that an Armenian girl would not wear a low-cut dress showing cleavage. And I don't care if she came from Paris. She just wouldn't do it. But I was a minority of one on that one. There were a few Armenians involved in the production, and I was usually the one that he did not want to see coming, because when I was coming, it was usually to criticize him for something. But he said, but Carla, she's supposed to be a sophisticated woman, and she's supposed to be sophisticated in relation to the Mikhail Bogosian character. So I want to show that she's a confident woman, and she wants to dress like that because she's confident. I said, fine, make your feminist woman somebody else, but she's not an Armenian girl. But I obviously didn't win that one.
Thank you. It's very interesting. It's a little behind the scenes story.
In regards to the film, I understand there is a love triangle. Did you find any controversy about, or how did you come to the decision of having a love story in the midst of the Armenian Genocide, and was there any controversy in regards to that?
It seemed to be a prerequisite for the story. I mean, the producers felt very strongly that they wanted to have a love story. And I think the director, Terry George, modeled this film after an epic film that was called Reds from the 80s, which showed two Americans caught in the middle of the Russian Revolution. They fall in love, conflicts going on all around them, and somehow the conflict tests their relationship. And so he wanted a similar kind of dynamic to be in this movie. I personally have my own opinion about this, and I think others have their own opinions. I think that there's something to be said for there being a personal relationship being tested, because we empathize with people who are in that situation. We can put ourselves maybe in the place of her character or his character, or the Christian Bale character maybe. I've been in conflicts, and there certainly is very intense feelings that are there when it's a life and death situation, and you think you may not live until tomorrow. When you think you only have a short time and that you've got to take the most of it. So there's something to be said for that. Whether you buy it or not is partly, I think, a function of the performances. And I'll say as a sidebar to that one of the hardest people to cast in the movie, who do you think it was? I'll give a guess. No, he was easy. I'll give you another guess. It was the girl, Anna Kasarian. In fact, they wanted to cast an Armenian actress. They auditioned many actresses. When they couldn't find, they could find lots of lovely, in terms of the physical look, absolutely perfect. But because you had such strong leads, Christian Bale and Oscar Isaac, who are like the actors of our generation, they're very have a depth of skill. They needed to match that with somebody who had done film work. And so they then thought they might go with a Persian actress. So they auditioned Iranian actresses. And they just could not find the right person. At the time, Charlotte Laban had made a number of movies, and lots of different ethnicities too. And while she doesn't look Armenian, she had what we call the acting chops. She had the chops, so it was decided to go with her. Whether you buy it. I've seen the movie several times. I've been involved with it. I'm a little biased. And every time I see it, I'm asking myself this question: do I buy this love story? And I actually think that the relationship with Christian Bale is very authentic. I think I buy that one. I think her relationship with Oscar Isaac seems to be more fraternal, a sort of brother-sister kind of relationship, but you may have a different opinion.
And I will add on that, the love story itself, it's like, it's a story of its own within this whole bigger picture. And through the educational perspective, it's a little bit challenging for teachers to buy into, maybe showing it because of that particular story. However, if you do, approach it with this concept of not just focusing on the love story itself, but kind of contextualizing the rest of the movie, and through the other significant scenes, it becomes an educational resource that, the love story doesn't even matter anymore, because it's all about the history. It's all about those scenes that are really showing what happened, and really then finding out, okay, is this accurate, is it not accurate, and then contextualizing that with primary and secondary sources.
Well, thank you, ladies, both. It's very, very interesting, and it's nice to know the background of the film that I never thought of. There was a couple of things that bothered me in the movie. I would have liked the Dr. Zhivago ending, number one. Number two, why did not one of the men die instead of the woman? And the other thing that bothered me at the very end, being an engineer and looking at probabilities, the probability that the cannonball is going to hit the little boat that she's on, the probability was so low that I felt really like this is not the right ending. That was my opinion based on just probabilities in being an engineer involved in weapons a lifetime ago.
Yeah, those are all fair comments, and I mean, it was just total. When you're constructing a story, it becomes totally arbitrary, who you're going to kill off. And the Christian Bale character dies in the Spanish Civil War, so he does eventually die, but not then. So I think it was. Because it's a work of fiction, it was decided that it was not expected that she should die, so it was supposed to come as a surprise. Although whenever you whisper the words "I love you" to somebody at the end, right at the end, we've made it. That's not a good sign in the movies. Somebody's going to go. So I personally agree with you. I will say that the boat scene at the end, just as a little movie factoid, all the underwater scenes were filmed in the largest water tank in the world, which the largest water tank for movie makers is larger than a football field, and it's actually in the island of Malta. And so all the underwater scenes were filmed in Malta. And that the other factoid, which is not relevant but is a little diversion to get you off of thinking of the negative ending, is that the little girl who falls off the boat, she was also very difficult to cast, the girl who played Yeva, the survivor, and because she needed to be able to act, but she also needed to be able to swim. And she was Spanish, and a lot of Spanish children don't swim. So for her to get that role, she needed to learn how to swim very quickly, or not get the part at all. We were going to cast an American, but the American didn't want to spend 3 weeks in Spain. So in the end, she learned how to swim in 3 weeks, which was something.
I wouldn't want to spend 3 weeks in Spain, beyond me.
Okay, let's give a big hand to both Carla and Seda. I'm not trying to advertise, but I want to thank personally Carla for giving me a day of my life, a glamour in this museum, for bringing both of the actors to the museum, unknown to me. As a VIP, I was expecting someone to come and make a donation to the museum, and I see this man dressed up like a long woman's hair in a jogging outfit with sunglasses, and it turns out to be Christian Bale. And what amazes me that both of them, they wanted to do their own personal homework, not what they've been told to do, what the script says. Christian Bale was difficult. He was a very challenging person, because every few minutes you get challenged, you don't know what you're going to answer. And with Oscar Isaac, to be honest with you, I didn't know who he was until I got called in that there's a gentleman with his significant other is here, wants to see the museum. And we get a lot of people that come from Europe for different reasons, and I was a little bit hesitant. So when I walked in, I saw him in front of the door. Carla wasn't involved. So I asked him what was his profession. He said, "I'm an actor." I said, "Are you a good actor?" He said, "I think so." And I asked him what was the last movie he made. He said, "Star Wars." I just wanted to open the opening of the door and just for me to dive inside. But Christian Bale was mainly asking questions. He said he didn't want the history. I made it clear that I wasn't a historian, but he spent quite a few hours. But Oscar Isaac was very interested in the role he was going to play as a groom. And it was interesting. And then right before then, a month before, the costume designers came in. They both were French, and they were talking in French, and I pretended I didn't understand. And they were looking, and they were taking a lot of pictures. And then they said there's going to be an epic movie. Okay, epic movie. I didn't know that after they left and they told the actors. So thank you, Carla, for giving me at least a glamour in my life. And afterwards, I went home and I told my kids, guess who came to the museum? But I was told that beforehand, Carla said a VIP, no pictures. So I said, okay, so I never thought about it. So thank you. We do have a reception downstairs. Everyone is welcome. Thank you again.
it's amazing. How come they don't have a little gate there? I was wondering, do you have, it's Fresno State, at USC now, is there an index of who's been